My name is Darlene Parker, and I am 52 years old. 3 weeks ago, my only son kicked me out of what he thought was his house, believing I was nothing more than a financial burden he could no longer carry. He looked me straight in the eye and told me it was time I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. What Marcus didn't know was that I had been standing on my own 2 feet for years, supported by a foundation he never imagined existed. The pain of his words cut deeper than any loss I had ever experienced. But sometimes the people we love most are the ones who see us least clearly. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe because this story will show you that sometimes the people closest to us see only what they want to see. 8 years ago, my husband Robert passed away from pancreatic cancer, leaving behind a grief that felt insurmountable and a life insurance policy worth $2 million. Robert had been a careful man, always planning for the worst while hoping for the best. In those dark months after his funeral, as I sat in our small house in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, I made a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I decided to live as though that money didn't exist. It wasn't about the money itself. Robert and I had raised Marcus to be independent, to work for what he wanted, to understand the value of earning his place in the world. When he graduated from Arizona State with his computer science degree, I watched him land a good job as a software engineer with pride swelling in my chest. He was making $75,000 a year, had his own apartment, and seemed to have his life figured out. But then he met Jessica. Jessica was beautiful, ambitious, and had very specific ideas about how life should be lived. She came from a family where appearances mattered more than substance, where success was measured by the size of your house and the brand of your car. Within months of their relationship, I watched my son begin to change. He started talking about money differently, about status, about what he deserved versus what he had earned. When they got engaged, Marcus started pressuring me to sell the house and move into a senior living community, not because I needed care, but because he thought the house was too much for me to handle financially. He had no idea that I could have bought the entire senior living community if I wanted to. Instead, I maintained my facade. I drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic with its faded paint and squeaky brakes. I shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons. I took a part-time job at the Maricopa County Library, not because I needed the $300 a week, but because it gave me a believable source of income and something meaningful to do with my time. The money from Robert's insurance policy sat in carefully managed investments, growing quietly, while I lived on what appeared to be a modest fixed income. I told myself I was teaching Marcus important lessons about self-reliance and not taking family for granted. I convinced myself that he would appreciate me more if he thought I was struggling, if he believed I needed his help rather than the other way around. Looking back now, I realize I was testing him. Every month that passed, every time he complained about my old car or suggested I apply for food assistance, I was waiting for him to show me who he really was. I just never expected the answer to be so painful. The first crack in our relationship appeared 6 months before he kicked me out. Marcus and Jessica had been married for 2 years, and they had started house hunting in Scottsdale. The homes they were looking at cost between $400,000 and $500,000, far more than I thought they could afford on their combined income of about $120,000. One Sunday afternoon in March, they came to my house with excited faces and real estate brochures spread across my kitchen table like battle plans. Jessica's eyes sparkled as she showed me photos of granite countertops and walk-in closets, while Marcus talked about mortgage rates and down payments with the confidence of someone who had done his research. Then came the question that changed everything. Marcus looked at me across that table, his father's green eyes serious and hopeful, and asked if I could loan them $50,000 for the down payment. He promised they would pay me back with interest, said it would be a good investment for both of us. Jessica nodded eagerly beside him, already planning where she would put her furniture in their dream home. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. I had $50,000 in my checking account just for monthly expenses. I could have written them a check right then and there without even touching my real savings. Instead, I heard myself saying the words that would begin the end of everything. I don't have that kind of money, sweetheart. The disappointment on Marcus's face was immediate and devastating. He had been so sure I would help, so certain that his mother would find a way to make their dreams come true. Jessica's expression shifted from hope to something harder. something that looked suspiciously like contempt. But, Mom, Jessica said, her voice carefully controlled, surely you have some savings, some kind of nest egg from Dad's pension or something. I shook my head, hating every second of the lie, but unable to stop myself. The pension barely covers my monthly expenses. I'm sorry, but I just don't have that kind of money to spare. Marcus spent the next hour going through my finances with me, trying to find money that he believed must be hidden somewhere. He looked at my bank statements, saw the modest balance in my checking account, and shook his head in frustration. He calculated my monthly income from the library job and my small pension, then compared it to what he estimated my expenses should be. Mom, you're living paycheck to paycheck, he said, and there was something in his voice that I had never heard before, something that sounded like pity mixed with irritation. This can't continue. What happens when you get sick? What happens when the car finally dies? You can't keep living like this. That conversation planted a seed of resentment that would grow over the following months. Marcus began calling more often, but not to chat or see how I was doing. He called to check on my finances, to offer unsolicited advice about budgeting and senior discounts. He suggested I apply for food stamps, recommended cheaper grocery stores, and even brought me a stack of coupons he had clipped from Jessica's magazines. Each gesture, meant to be helpful, felt like another small humiliation. I was a woman with $2 million in investments being handed grocery store coupons by my son because he thought I couldn't afford to eat properly. The irony was so bitter it kept me awake at night. Jessica's influence during this period was like poison seeping into a well. She would make comments about my clothes, suggesting I shop at specific discount stores where she had seen cute things for older ladies. She brought me bags of her leftover food after dinner parties, claiming she hated to waste anything while simultaneously posting photos of their expensive restaurant meals on social media. But the worst part was watching Marcus begin to view me as a liability rather than his mother. He started talking about long-term care insurance and the possibility of me moving in with them once they got their house. Not because he wanted me close, but because he was worried about the financial burden I might become. I could have ended all of it with one conversation, one simple revelation about my true financial situation. Instead, I let the lie grow larger and more complicated, telling myself that this was temporary, that once Marcus proved himself to be the man I hoped he was, I would reveal the truth and we would laugh about it together. I never imagined that my test would become his justification for cruelty. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July. I was watering my small garden behind the house, enjoying the brief coolness before the Arizona sun made being outdoors unbearable when Marcus pulled into my driveway with a screech of tires that told me something was very wrong. He stormed through my back gate without knocking his face red with anger and frustration. Jessica followed behind him, her expression cold and determined. In Marcus's hand was a stack of papers that I recognized immediately as mortgage documents. We didn't get the house he announced without preamble. The sellers accepted another offer, a cash offer. I set down my watering can and looked at my son, seeing the disappointment etched in every line of his face. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know how much you wanted that one. Sorry doesn't help us, Mom, he snapped back. We've been looking for 8 months. Every time we find something we like, we get outbid by people who can pay cash. Do you know what it's like to lose your dream home because you can't come up with $50,000? The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke. I knew exactly what he was implying, and the unfairness of it made my chest tight with anger. Marcus believed that I was choosing not to help them, that somewhere I had money hidden away that I was selfishly keeping to myself. Jessica stepped forward then, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Pure, undisguised contempt. Darlene, she said, using my first name instead of calling me Mom like she had for the first 2 years of their marriage. Marcus and I have been talking. We think it's time for some tough love here. Marcus nodded, his jaw set in the stubborn way that reminded me so much of his father. Mom, you can't keep living in denial about your situation. You're barely scraping by, you have no emergency fund, and you're 1 car repair away from financial disaster. It's time to face reality. What reality is that, Marcus? I asked, though I dreaded hearing his answer. The reality is that you need our help more than we need yours, Jessica said smoothly. And if you're not going to be honest with us about your finances, then we can't help you make good decisions. For the next hour, they presented their case like prosecutors laying out evidence against a defendant. They had researched senior living communities in the area and found several that they claimed would be perfect for someone in my situation. They showed me brochures for assisted living facilities with monthly rates that would eat up my entire supposed income, leaving nothing for the amenities they promised would make my life easier. Marcus pulled out his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet he had created detailing what he believed my monthly expenses should be. According to his calculations, I was spending more than I earned, which meant I must be accumulating debt or depleting savings that I wasn't telling them about. "Mom, I love you, but this has to stop," he said, his voice softer but no less firm. "You're being irresponsible and it's affecting all of us. Jessica and I lie awake at night worrying about you. We can't start our own family when we're constantly stressed about whether you can pay your electric bill." The mention of starting a family hit me like a physical blow. They were planning children and they saw me as an obstacle to that future, rather than someone who might be part of it. In their minds, I wasn't a potential grandmother who might spoil their children and babysit on weekends. I was a financial burden that needed to be managed before they could move forward with their lives. That night, after they left with promises to come back with more information about senior living options, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my most recent investment statement, $2.3 million. More than enough to buy their dream house outright and still leave me comfortable for the rest of my life. But my son saw me as a burden. My daughter-in-law viewed me as an impediment to their happiness. The money I had saved and invested carefully for 8 years had become a secret that was destroying my relationship with the only family I had left. I went to bed that night knowing that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with Marcus. The little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared had become a man who saw his mother as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be cherished. But I still believed that he would come to his senses. I still thought that love would win out over frustration, that family bonds would prove stronger than financial concerns. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The day Marcus kicked me out started like any other. I was at the library helping a young mother find board books for her toddler when my phone buzzed with a text message from my son. "We need to talk. Coming over at 6. The tone was ominous, but I told myself it might be good news. Maybe they had found another house. Maybe Marcus had gotten a promotion at work. Maybe they were ready to announce that I was going to be a grandmother. I finished my shift with hope fluttering in my chest like a caged bird. Marcus arrived alone, which should have been my first warning. He parked in my driveway and sat in his car for a full 5 minutes before getting out, and I watched him through my front window, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way he kept running his hands through his hair. When he finally came to the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost desperate. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation," he said without even saying hello. "Can I come in?" We sat in my living room, the same room where I had rocked him as a baby, where we had watched cartoons together on Saturday mornings, where I had helped him with homework and listened to his dreams about the future. Now he sat across from me like a stranger delivering bad news. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "About your financial situation and the choices we all need to make going forward." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Jessica and I have been doing some research, and we found a really nice assisted living community about 20 minutes from here. They have income-based housing for seniors, and the monthly payments would be less than what you're spending to maintain this house." "Marcus," I said carefully, "I don't need assisted living. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "But that's just it, Mom," he said, leaning forward with the earnest expression he had worn as a child when he was trying to convince me to let him stay up past his bedtime. "You're not taking care of yourself. You're struggling financially, you're isolated here, and you're not being realistic about what you can afford." He pulled out another folder, this one thick with paperwork and photographs. Inside were applications for senior housing financial assistance forms and brochures for facilities that looked more like hospitals than homes. "I've already submitted some preliminary paperwork," he said, and the words hit me like ice water. "There's a waiting list, but they think they can have a spot available within 60 days. My son had filled out paperwork to have me institutionalized without my knowledge or consent. He had made decisions about my life based on lies I had told him, but the betrayal felt complete and devastating nonetheless. Marcus, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt, I am not moving into assisted living. This is my home. I've lived here for 15 years, and I'm not ready to leave it. That's when his mask slipped, and I saw the frustration and resentment that had been building for months. Mom, you don't have a choice, he said sharply. You can't afford this house. You can barely afford groceries. I can't keep worrying about whether you're going to end up homeless because you're too proud to accept help. I'm not too proud to accept help, I said. I just don't need the kind of help you're offering. That's exactly what I'm talking about, he said, standing up and beginning to pace around my small living room. You live in denial. You act like everything is fine when it's obviously not. Do you know what Jessica and I gave up last month? We canceled our vacation because we were worried you might need money for car repairs. The guilt in his voice was real, but it was mixed with anger that made his next words feel like physical blows. I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't put my life on hold because you won't face reality. Jessica and I want to start a family, but we can't do that when we're constantly worried about supporting you too. He stopped pacing and looked at me with eyes that held no trace of the little boy I had raised. You need to move out, he said, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. I've talked to a real estate agent, and she thinks we can get a good price for this house. The money will be enough to pay for your care at the assisted living place for several years, and whatever's left over can help Jessica and me with our down payment. The betrayal was so complete, so stunning in its scope that for a moment I couldn't breathe. My son wasn't just asking me to leave my home. He was planning to sell it out from under me to fund his own dreams, believing that he had the right to make that decision because he viewed me as incompetent. Marcus, I said, when I finally found my voice, this house is mine. It's been in my name since your father died. You can't sell it. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. Mom, I've been paying the property taxes for 3 years. I've been covering the homeowner's insurance. As far as I'm concerned, I've been supporting this house longer than you have. Maybe it's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet instead of relying on me to bail you out every time you can't make ends meet. The lies had become so twisted, so far from reality, that I almost laughed. My son thought he had been supporting me when I had been using my own money to pay bills while allowing him to believe he was helping. The checks he occasionally sent for property taxes came from an account I had funded myself, but he believed he was making sacrifices for his irresponsible mother. You have 30 days, he said, pulling a legal document from his folder. I've already started the process to have you declared financially incompetent. If you fight this, it's just going to be harder on everyone. He left that night without hugging me goodbye, without saying he loved me, without any acknowledgement that he was destroying the last remnants of our relationship. I sat in my living room until dawn, staring at the legal papers he had left behind, papers that would have made him my legal guardian if I hadn't had the resources to fight them. It was then that I realized my test had revealed exactly who my son had become. And I didn't like what I saw. The time for pretending to be helpless was over. It was time for Marcus to learn that his mother was far from powerless and that actions have consequences that can reshape a family forever. The morning after Marcus delivered his ultimatum, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of grief, guilt, and misplaced maternal protection had lifted, leaving behind a sharp, cold anger that focused my thoughts like a laser beam. I made coffee in the kitchen where my son had told me I was too poor to live. Then I picked up my phone and called William Harrison, the attorney who had handled Robert's estate 8 years earlier. William was a kind man in his late 60s who had guided me through the darkest period of my life with patience and wisdom. Darlene, he said, when his secretary put me through, it's good to hear from you. How are you holding up? I've been better, William, I said. I need to see you as soon as possible. It's about my son. 2 hours later, I sat in William's mahogany-paneled office overlooking downtown Phoenix, spreading Marcus's legal documents across his desk like evidence in a criminal trial. William read through them carefully, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. Darlene, he said finally, do you understand what your son is trying to do here? He's trying to have me declared incompetent so he can sell my house and put me in assisted living, I said. The question is, can he do it? William leaned back in his leather chair and studied me with the sharp eyes that had made him one of the most respected estate attorneys in Arizona. Not if you don't want him to, he said. But I have to ask, why does he think you're financially incompetent? You're one of the most financially stable clients I have. For the next hour, I told William everything. About the decision to hide my wealth, about the years of pretending to struggle, about watching my son's character change as he began to see me as a burden rather than his mother. William listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions for clarification, but never once making me feel foolish for the choices I had made. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Darlene," he said finally, "I understand why you did what you did. You wanted to teach your son values, independence, the importance of earning his way in the world. But somewhere along the line, this became less about teaching him and more about testing him. And I'm afraid he's failed that test rather spectacularly." I nodded, feeling tears threaten for the first time since Marcus had left my house. "The question now," William continued, "is what you want to do about it. You could simply tell him the truth, show him your financial statements, and end this charade. Or, I prompted, or you could let him learn the lesson you originally intended to teach him. But you should understand that if you choose that path, your relationship with your son may never recover." I thought about Marcus's face the night before, the cold certainty with which he had delivered his ultimatum, the casual cruelty with which he had dismissed my feelings and my autonomy. I thought about the years I had spent pretending to be poor while he developed a sense of superiority and entitlement that would have horrified his father. "What would I need to do?" I asked. "First, we transfer the deed to the house back into your name only," William said. "Right now, it's jointly owned, which gave Marcus some legal standing for his guardianship petition. Once it's solely in your name, his petition becomes much weaker. Second, we make sure all your assets are properly documented and protected. I'll prepare statements showing your true financial position that we can present to any court if necessary. And third," William said with a slight smile, "we give your son exactly what he asked for. He wants you to stand on your own 2 feet. Let's show him what that really looks like." Over the next 3 weeks, I methodically dismantled the life I had built around the lie of poverty. I opened new bank accounts and transferred funds to make my true financial situation visible to anyone who might investigate. I hired a private investigator to document Marcus's activities and his repeated statements about my supposed incompetence, just in case I needed evidence for court proceedings. But, most importantly, I began shopping for the tools of my liberation. The Mercedes-Benz dealership in Scottsdale was a cathedral of gleaming chrome and leather filled with cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I walked through the showroom in my carefully chosen outfit, a navy blue suit that whispered money without shouting it, my silver hair styled in a way that suggested confidence and means. The salesman who approached me, a polished young man named David, took one look at me and adjusted his assessment immediately. He didn't see a confused elderly woman who had wandered in off the street. He saw a potential customer with the bearing and presentation of someone who belonged in this space. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said with genuine respect. "How can I help you today?" "I'm interested in the S-Class," I said simply. "Something reliable for daily driving." For the next 2 hours, David walked me through the features of various models, explaining the differences between engines and trim levels, with the patience of someone who understood that his commission depended on treating every customer as though they might buy the most expensive car on the lot. I test drove 3 different vehicles before settling on a silver S560 with every available option. The sticker price was just over $95,000 more than Marcus made in an entire year, more than he thought I spent on everything in 2 years combined. When I told David I would take it, he asked about financing with the casual professionalism that suggested he dealt with cash buyers regularly. "I'll be paying cash," I said, enjoying the way his eyes widened slightly. As David prepared the paperwork, I walked around the showroom admiring the other vehicles and thinking about the second part of my plan. Marcus knew that I sometimes came to this dealership not to buy anything but to attend the community events they hosted for seniors. He had driven me here himself several times, always making gentle jokes about my champagne tastes and beer budget. Next Saturday, I knew he and Jessica would be here looking at the new BMW 3 Series she had been coveting. They had posted about it on social media, excited about finally being able to afford a luxury car now that they were free from the burden of supporting me. I completed the purchase of my Mercedes that afternoon, arranging for delivery the following Monday. Then I returned to William's office to finalize the legal paperwork that would protect my assets and ensure that Marcus's guardianship petition would be dismissed. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my son had delivered his ultimatum, and planned the moment that would change both of our lives forever. I felt no joy in what I was about to do, only the grim satisfaction of a mother who had finally decided to stop enabling her child's worst impulses. Marcus had wanted me to stand on my own 2 feet. On Saturday, he would see exactly how steady those feet could be. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline blue sky that makes Phoenix beautiful despite its brutal summers. I took extra care getting ready, choosing clothes that would send the right message without being ostentatious. The navy suit again paired with low heels and jewelry that was elegant but understated. I wanted to look like money without looking like I was trying to prove something. The drive to the dealership in my new Mercedes was surreal. For 8 years, I had rattled around Phoenix in my old Honda, its air conditioning struggling and its radio picking up more static than music. Now I glided silently through traffic in climate-controlled luxury, the car's advanced systems monitoring everything from my tire pressure to my following distance. I arrived at the dealership at exactly 10:30, knowing that Marcus and Jessica never arrived anywhere before 11. The Porsche Macan I had inquired about the previous week was parked in the premium display area, its deep blue paint gleaming under the showroom lights. David greeted me like the valued customer I had become, offering me coffee and pastries while we discussed the details of the Porsche purchase. I wasn't actually planning to buy a second car, but the theater of the moment required props, and David was an unwitting actor in the drama that was about to unfold. We had been talking for about 20 minutes when I saw Marcus's Honda Accord pull into the parking lot. My heart rate spiked despite my careful preparation, and I had to remind myself to breathe slowly and stay calm. Marcus and Jessica walked through the main entrance holding hands, their faces bright with the excitement of people about to make a significant purchase. Jessica was dressed in what I recognized as her most expensive outfit, a white dress and heels that probably cost more than I supposedly spent on groceries in a month. Marcus wore khakis and a button-down shirt that made him look younger than his 28 years. They headed directly to the BMW section, where a saleswoman immediately approached them with the kind of eager attention that new car shoppers receive. I watched them from across the showroom, feeling a complex mix of love and disappointment as I observed my son in his element, confident and successful, completely unaware that his mother was 50 feet away discussing the purchase of a $75,000 vehicle. For about 10 minutes, they were absorbed in looking at cars, sitting in driver's seats, opening and closing doors, discussing features and options with their salesperson. I continued my conversation with David, asking detailed questions about the Porsche's performance capabilities and maintenance requirements, playing my role as a discerning buyer while keeping one eye on my son. Then Marcus turned around. The moment our eyes met across that showroom, I saw his face go through a series of expressions so rapid it was like watching a stop-motion film. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and something that might have been panic flashed across his features in the space of about 3 seconds. He said something to Jessica, who looked in my direction with the same expression of shocked confusion. Then he walked toward me with the uncertain gait of someone who wasn't sure if they were dreaming or hallucinating. "Mom," he said when he was close enough to speak without shouting. "What? What are you doing here?" I looked up from the Porsche brochure I had been pretending to study and met my son's eyes with what I hoped was calm composure. "Hello, Marcus," I said. "I'm buying a car. What does it look like?" "But how can you afford—" He started, then stopped, apparently realizing that his question might be overheard by the salespeople around us. David, who had been watching this exchange with professional curiosity, stepped forward with a smile. "That's Parker, would you like me to give you a few minutes with your family?" "That would be lovely, David," I said. "We'll continue our discussion in a moment." Marcus waited until David was out of earshot, then leaned closer to me, his voice low and urgent. "Mom, what's going on? How are you here? Whose car is this?" I gestured toward the silver Mercedes visible through the showroom windows, its temporary tags still taped to the rear window. "It's mine," I said simply. "I bought it on Monday." The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly I was momentarily concerned he might faint. Jessica appeared beside him. her mouth slightly open, staring at the Mercedes like it was a UFO that had landed in the parking lot. "But you said you didn't have any money?" Jessica said, her voice higher than usual. "You said you couldn't afford to help us with the house." I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had spent 2 years treating me like a charity case, and felt a deep sadness for the relationship that might have been. "I said I didn't have $50,000 to spare," I corrected. "I never said I didn't have any money." Marcus grabbed my arm, not roughly, but with the desperate intensity of someone trying to wake up from a nightmare. "Mom, I don't understand. Where did this money come from? Did you take out a loan? Are you in debt now because of this car?" The concern in his voice was real, but it was mixed with something else. Fear. He was beginning to understand that everything he thought he knew about his mother's situation might be wrong. "Marcus," I said gently, removing his hand from my arm, "I think we need to have a conversation. A real conversation this time." I turned to David, who had been hovering nearby with the patience of a man who had witnessed family drama in luxury car dealerships before. "David, I think I'm going to postpone our discussion about the Porsche for today. I'll call you next week." "Of course, Mrs. Parker," he said smoothly. "Take all the time you need." I gathered my purse and the Mercedes keys, then looked at my son and daughter-in-law, both of whom seemed frozen in place. "Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere more private?" I asked. "Or would you prefer to discuss your mother's finances here in front of everyone?" Marcus nodded mutely, and the three of us walked toward the dealership's exit in silence that felt like the calm before a very destructive storm. In the parking lot, standing beside my new Mercedes, I looked at my son's face and saw the exact moment when the full implications of what he was seeing finally hit him. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Mom, what have I done?" That I said quietly, "is exactly what we need to talk about." The conversation that followed took place in my car with Marcus in the passenger seat and Jessica in the back, both of them staring around at the luxury interior like they had been transported to an alien planet. The leather seats, the advanced dashboard, the quiet hum of the premium sound system, all of it spoke of a level of affluence that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life. I drove us to a small park near the dealership, a quiet place with benches overlooking a man-made lake where families brought children to feed ducks on weekend mornings. It seemed like an appropriate setting for the conversation that would either rebuild or destroy what remained of our relationship. When I turned off the engine, the silence in the car was absolute. "Marcus," I said finally, "do you remember what you said to me last Tuesday night about learning to stand on my own 2 feet?" He nodded, his face pale and his eyes fixed on his hands folded in his lap. "Well, I said I've been standing on my own 2 feet for 8 years. The insurance policy your father left me was worth $2 million. With careful investing, it's grown to about $2.3 million. Jessica made a small sound in the back seat, something between a gap and a whimper. "When your father died, I made a decision to live modestly to let you believe that I was struggling financially because I wanted you to develop independence and self-reliance. I wanted you to build your own life without relying on your mother's money." Marcus finally looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "But, Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "we thought you needed help. We thought you were struggling." "I know what you thought," I said. "The question is, what did you do with that information?" For the next hour, I laid out the truth of the past 8 years. I told them about the investment accounts, the careful budgeting that had allowed me to maintain the illusion of poverty while my wealth grew quietly in the background. I explained about the library job, the modest lifestyle, the deliberate choice to drive an old car and shop at thrift stores. But more importantly, I told them what it had been like to watch my son's character change over those years, how I had seen him develop a sense of superiority over his supposedly struggling mother, how he had begun to view me as a burden rather than a person deserving of respect and love. "Marcus," I said, "when you came to my house last week, you didn't ask if I needed help. You didn't offer to support me or find ways to improve my situation. You decided that I was incompetent and needed to be managed. You started legal proceedings to have me declared unfit to make my own decisions." "I know," he whispered. "God, Mom, I know. I was just so scared that something would happen to you, that you'd end up homeless or hungry, and it would be my fault for not stepping in sooner." "But that's just it," I said. "You weren't stepping in to help me. You were stepping in to control me." There's a difference. Jessica, who had been silent throughout most of this conversation, finally spoke up. But, Darlene, she said, her voice small and defensive, if you had just told us the truth from the beginning, none of this would have happened. I turned to look at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had spent 2 years treating me with barely concealed contempt. You're right, Jessica, I said. If I had told you the truth, none of this would have happened. But then I never would have learned who you and Marcus really are when you think someone is beneath you. The words hung in the air like smoke, and I saw Jessica flinch as though I had slapped her. When you thought I was poor, I continued, you treated me like a burden. You suggested I apply for food stamps. You brought me your leftover food like I was a charity case. You convinced my son that I was a problem that needed to be solved rather than a person who deserved respect. But we were trying to help, Jessica said, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. No, I said firmly. You were trying to manage me. You were trying to minimize the inconvenience I represented to your plans for the future. Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, and now he spoke up with a voice full of anguish. Mom, how do I fix this? How do I make this right? I looked at my son, this man who had been the center of my world for 28 years, and felt my heart break a little more. Marcus, I said, I don't know if you can fix this. For months, you've been making decisions about my life without my consent. You've been treating me like I was mentally incompetent. You tried to have me legally declared unfit to make my own decisions so you could sell my house and put me in assisted living. I know, he said, his voice barely audible. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough, I said, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. Marcus, you've shown me who you are when you think someone is vulnerable and dependent on you. You've shown me how you treat people you perceive as beneath you. That's not something you can apologize away. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jessica crying quietly in the back seat and the distant laughter of children playing near the lake. So what happens now? Marcus asked finally. Now, I said, you learn to live with the consequences of your choices, and I learned to live with the knowledge that the son I raised became someone I don't recognize. I started the car and drove them back to the dealership in silence, my heart heavy with the weight of lost illusions and shattered relationships. As they got out of my Mercedes and walked toward their modest Honda, I realized that my test had revealed exactly what I had feared it would. Sometimes the people we love most are capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined possible. And sometimes the lessons we teach our children are not the ones we intended. The months that followed that confrontation were the most difficult of my life since Robert's death. The immediate aftermath brought a flurry of phone calls from Marcus, each one more desperate than the last as he tried to process the magnitude of what had happened and find some way to repair the damage he had caused. At first, I was too hurt and too angry to engage with his attempts at reconciliation. I moved out of the house where I had raised him, not because I had to, but because every room held memories of the boy he had been before he became the man who tried to have me declared incompetent. I found a beautiful penthouse apartment in downtown Scottsdale with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the desert mountains, a place that reflected my true circumstances rather than the lie I had been living. The legal proceedings Marcus had initiated were dismissed within a week of my meeting with William Harrison. The court took one look at my financial statements and the evidence of my sound mental state, and Marcus's petition for guardianship was thrown out so decisively that the judge suggested he might want to reconsider his understanding of his mother's capabilities. But dismissing a legal proceeding was far easier than healing the wounds that had been inflicted on our relationship. For the first 3 months after our confrontation, I refused to see Marcus at all. His calls went unanswered. His emails were deleted without being read, and the flowers he sent were given away to my neighbors. I needed time and space to process not just his betrayal, but my own role in creating the situation that had led to it. During this period of isolation, I threw myself into activities that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother. I joined the board of a local scholarship foundation using my financial resources to help young people achieve their educational goals without the burden of overwhelming debt. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see but had postponed while maintaining the fiction of financial struggle. I took art classes, learned to play the piano, and discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. It was during this time of rediscovery that I met Eleanor, a widow in her early 70s, who had also been navigating the complex territory of family relationships and financial independence. Eleanor had been dealing with her own adult children's attempts to control her life, and we found comfort in sharing our experiences over coffee and long walks through the desert preserve near my new home. Eleanor was the one who finally convinced me to answer one of Marcus's calls. "Darlene," she said one morning as we sat by my apartment's pool watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, "you're going to have to decide whether you want to be right or whether you want to have a relationship with your son." "I want both," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew how unrealistic they sounded. "You can't have both," Eleanor said gently. "Marcus made terrible choices and he hurt you deeply. But he's also a young man who panicked when he thought his mother was in trouble, and his panic led him to make decisions that were controlling and cruel. The question is whether you think he's capable of learning from this experience and becoming a better person." That evening, 6 months after our confrontation at the car dealership, I finally answered my phone when Marcus called. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain and hopeful. "Mom, is that really you?" "Yes, Marcus," I said. "I'm here." What followed was the first honest conversation my son and I had ever had. Marcus had been going to therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in family relationships and communication patterns. He had begun to understand how his fear and his desire to control outcomes had led him to treat me not as his mother, but as a problem to be managed. He told me about the sleepless nights he had spent replaying our last conversation about the guilt he felt over the way he had dismissed my autonomy and my intelligence. He talked about his marriage to Jessica and how her attitudes toward money and status had influenced his own behavior in ways he was only beginning to recognize. Most importantly, he apologized without making excuses or trying to minimize what he had done. "Mom," he said, "I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't take back the things I said or the legal papers I filed, but I want you to know that I understand now how completely I failed you, not just as a son, but as a human being." The conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end of it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. But rebuilding trust is a slow process, and Marcus's transformation didn't happen overnight. Our reconciliation took place in careful stages with boundaries and expectations clearly defined. I agreed to see him once a week for coffee, always in public places, always for limited periods of time. Jessica was not included in these meetings, a boundary that Marcus accepted without argument. Gradually, over the course of nearly a year, we began to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than the lies and assumptions that had characterized our interactions for so long. Marcus learned to see me as a complete person rather than just his mother, someone with her own intelligence, resources, and right to make decisions about her life. I learned to see him as a flawed human being who was capable of growth and change rather than the perfect son I had imagined or the disappointing man he had temporarily become. The relationship between Marcus and Jessica underwent its own evolution during this period. She struggled to accept that her mother-in-law was not the helpless, elderly woman she had imagined, and that her own behavior toward me had been condescending and cruel. Some of the tensions in their marriage that had been blamed on my supposed neediness were revealed to have deeper roots in their different values and communication styles. Eventually, Jessica and I had our own conversation, a difficult but necessary discussion about respect assumptions and the way fear of financial insecurity had caused her to view me as a threat rather than a potential ally. While our relationship never became the close mother-daughter bond I had once hoped for, we achieved a level of mutual respect that allowed family gatherings to be pleasant rather than exercises in barely contained hostility. Today, more than 2 years after that confrontation in the car dealership, Marcus and I have lunch together every Sunday. We talk about his work, my volunteer activities, current events, and sometimes carefully about the lessons we both learned during the darkest period of our relationship. He has never again tried to make decisions for me or treat me as though I am incapable of managing my own life. Marcus and Jessica eventually bought their dream house using money they saved themselves, rather than the inheritance they had once expected from my estate. They are talking about starting a family, and when that happens, I will be a grandmother who is involved in their lives by choice rather than obligation. But perhaps the most important change is in my own understanding of what it means to love someone. I learned that hiding who you are, even with good intentions, creates space for misunderstanding and resentment to grow. I learned that testing the people you love is a dangerous game that can reveal truths you're not prepared to handle. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them see who they really are when they think no one is watching. My son learned that day that wealth isn't just about money in the bank, it's about the richness of character. And sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones we understand the least. The woman who once pretended to be poor to teach her son humility became a woman who uses her wealth to create opportunities for others, not because she has to, but because she chooses to. And the son who once tried to control his mother's life became a man who asks for advice rather than giving ultimatums, who offers support rather than demanding compliance. We both learned that family relationships like financial investments require careful tending and honest assessment. Sometimes the portfolio needs to be rebalanced, and sometimes you have to accept losses in order to protect what truly matters. But when the rebuilding is done with patience and genuine love, the result can be stronger and more valuable than what existed before. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between protecting someone you love and letting them learn important lessons on their own? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the complex relationships that shape our lives. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand tall and let the truth speak for itself. Until next time, may you find the courage to be exactly who you are, and may the people who love you have the wisdom to see your worth.